Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Walmer, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. First of all, we're going to follow up from our previous episode and your trip to the Bosch company in Germany, looking at the technology surrounding driverless cars. And we're going to just go a little bit into more detail on what you discovered there. We'll also be looking at the very important Rail 200 celebrations, which reached a decisive point earlier in August with the Greatest Gathering in Derby, talking about your and my trip to the Greatest Gathering. We then have an interview looking to the future of transport and railways in particular with Darren Caplan, who's the Chief Executive of the Railway Industry Association.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yes, we did have this episode about the fact that I went to Stuttgart and got in a driverless car for the first time in my life. And a couple of listeners have then said, well, what did you actually think of it? And we rather left it in the lurch. So I thought I'd just give a few thoughts about that I wasn't amazingly impressed, to be honest. This is what's called level 2 technology, which is really driver aid stuff. But the car did drive through Stuttgart pretty much on its own, although it was on a pre-planned route, and at times the operator, as they're called, had to change the route. And there was this very interesting bit which I did mention on the podcast, where it got stopped behind a car with flashing lights, which was delivering something. And it didn't quite know what to do. It didn't quite know whether to overtake it or whether to stay behind. And it was a real shame that the car with flashing lights had then finished its delivery and went off. And we never really found out what it was going to do. So, um, it was kind of, partly impressive that, the steering wheel moves on its own and nobody's touching it. But it's also a long way from being driverless.
So were the people at Bosch looking to develop fully autonomous vehicles, or are they more in the category of looking for aids that can assist a driver at certain parts of the journey, perhaps when less direct intervention is needed?
That's a very good question, which they wouldn't really quite answer because I
Right.
asked them that.
Okay.
Um, and they said they're not in the business of producing any of these cars. What they are in the business of is providing software and some hardware for all kinds of cars, some of which may be just driver's aids, but with the notion possibly in the future that they might be a totally driverless car. But they didn't really want to talk about that. And I found that interesting in itself because, in the early days when I started writing about this, like 7 or 8 years ago now, the driverless car companies were very keen on promoting the whole idea that this is going to be, totally driverless and there's going to be a new era for motoring. Whereas now the people I talked to, and the Bosch people in particular, basically didn't want to go there, and they're basically saying we're going to put in all sorts of safety features of driver aids, of kind of things to make it easier for drivers, but they didn't kind of want to speculate as to where that is going. But it must be said, they have a couple of thousand people employed on just the AI aspects of this. So they're investing a lot of money in it, which they then hope to recoup from what's called the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, who will then install it in their cars.
And is anybody kind of, I mean, you're in a way, you're for the last 7 and 8 years, you've been saying you've been the person saying the emperor has no clothes on all of this. You know, consistently sort of skeptical, and exposing some of the hype and the nonsense. Is it your perception that the people promoting this stuff, the kind of high priests of the driverless vehicles, actually believe it, or is there something else going on here? Is this something to make sure that the investment money and the tax breaks continue, and that they kind of know that it's never actually going to be a realistic proposition? What's your
No,
impression?
I think they believe it.
Right.
I think it's, I mean, it's almost like a cult. I think they have to believe that what they're doing is a game changer, and they've been saying it for years and years and years. Now, I think that some of them, that I think there's a split within the kind of driverless car movement, if one can call it that, where there are these fundamentalists who really still believe that level five, as they call it, which is a car that can go anywhere, everywhere, at any time, all day long, a level five will eventually be reached, and that will be a game changer. I think most of them, though, are probably a bit skeptical about that and think that it will improve driving and add some safety features. It will make it safer. That's what they're convinced of. Though I'm not, but they are convinced that it will make it safer. So I think there's that split. There are some fundamentalists who absolutely believe in it. And there's a lot of other people working for it who think they're doing a lot of good. Maybe they have to believe that
I'm sure we'll be returning to this subject in future episodes.
many times.
Loyal listeners will know that 2025 is the year of Rail 200, celebrating 2 centuries since the opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the first recognisable railway operation in the world. The highlight, in many respects, of the year's celebrations took place in Derby at the Alstom Works earlier in August, and both Christian and I were fortunate enough to be able to attend the greatest gathering in Derby. Christian, what was your experience?
Well, look, I was amazingly impressed. 40,000 people went there in 3 days. They'd opened up the whole of the Alstom Works, and which rather suggests that the Alstom Works have got quite a lot of empty warehouses that they could fill up with kind of model railway equipment and all sorts of other things at the moment because they haven't got many orders. But they made good use of this. And it was a big publicity coup. It did get quite a lot of media coverage. There were some 200 locomotives or trains of one sort or another, and some of them you could kind of get on. Um, to my mind, there were an awful lot of diesels in blue and yellow British Rail livery, and not that many steam engines, which is what probably lots of people came. But there were families that I think it was split about half and half between railway enthusiasts and families, ordinary families, who were having a great time. I mean, so it was a great event. I think it's right to use the railway history in that way as a way of kind of promoting the industry. I thought it was a little bit hardware oriented and not enough stuff about what the railways have done for us. Because I think, in a way, the importance of railways is far beyond the hardware. But nevertheless, maybe the hardware, what people want. And I went there to give a talk on my revised book, Fire and Steam, which has been reissued in line with the 200th anniversary, which available in all good bookshops, with an introduction from Peter Hendy, and now the rail minister. And I got a very good reception. Sold quite a lot of books, and lots of people came up to me. So there was a good bunch of people who were interested in the wider aspects of the railways. But most of the people there just wanted to see a bit of hardware, to be honest. What was your impression? Because you had a rather nice trip there.
Well, I was lucky enough to go twice. So I was invited to the official opening by the nice people at Alstom on the Thursday. And then on the Saturday, thanks to an invitation that was issued to the Calling All Stations podcast, I was able to have something more approaching one of your adventures, Christian, in the way that I reached Derby and what I experienced en route and on the way back. And here's my account. It's a very early start from Peterborough for my daughter Megan and I on the Saturday of the Rail 200 Greatest Gathering weekend in Derby. Derby is one of the cities that I visit most frequently in my work, usually in a relatively simple 90-minute train hop changing at Leicester. The 5 a.m. wake-up is because we are travelling south to London in order to rebound northwards on the spectacular Belmond British Pullman to the Greatest Gathering event. Mercifully, there are no delays on the East Coast Main Line, and LNER deposits us at King's Cross slightly ahead of schedule. We cross by underground to Victoria to be greeted by the first, ever so slightly, alcoholic beverage of the day at 8 a.m, and a top quality singer creating a kind of 1930s Agatha Christie vibe on platforms more regularly buzzing with commuters. The 170 passengers board the train, and what a train it turns out to be. To describe it as an excursion special doesn't even begin to do the British Pullman justice, as this is no seaside rake of slam-door stock heading for Skegness or Scarborough. Everything about its individually named coaches, built in 1925, shouts luxury and a haloed golden age of rail travel. From the exquisite interiors crafted by the same hands that produced the Titanic to the immaculately uniformed staff, for whom nothing is too much trouble. We find ourselves amongst an eclectic mix of travellers, all of whom are observing the Dress to Impress apparel code, ranging from excited overseas tourists, retired Brits who seem to do this sort of thing all the time, to a hardcore of incredibly knowledgeable railway experts. In that regard, listeners who know even a bit about railways will realise that, departing from Victoria, we're facing the wrong way for a trip to Derby. One of those experts sitting across the aisle from me already knew exactly how the manoeuvre of turning north would be accomplished. Just as he anticipated, we departed southwards but quickly turned to the west and then the north, traversing the West London line. Locals waved to us from their back gardens as we trundle past, before crossing the Thames with a powerful Class 67 diesel locomotive hauling the 11-coach formation. At Acton, the train pauses to change direction completely. Then we make our way to Brent to join the Midland Main Line and finally pick up some serious speed. From the outset, the diligent catering staff have been producing a silver service brunch, which seems to be of the bottomless as well as the fine dining variety. A little later, as we hurtle through Bedfordshire, I'm able to observe the former brickfields, which featured on the curriculum of all us school children growing up in the county, but now await their promised transformation into the Universal Studios theme park. As we approach Bedford Midland Station, I hope to show my daughter where the old man started work, oh so many years ago. But the buildings are obscured by a Thameslink train. This causes me to recall when the idea of the Thameslink first bubbled to the surface in the late 1970s when I worked at the station. The Midland suburban electrification was underway and was originally just supposed to allow the replacement of the diesel fleet between Bedford, St Pancras and Moorgate. Then some clever British Rail people came up with the idea of linking the networks north and south of the river through a disused tunnel called Snow Hill. What followed was a transformation of connectivity between the counties north and south of London, just as remarkable but rather less celebrated than the Elizabeth line, which now links east and west. While the Belmond British Pullman has been powering ahead, delivering its classic cinematic experience, the real star of the show is almost with us. This is no less than the world's most famous locomotive, the 1923 A3 Flying Scotsman, which replaces the Class 67 on our train in Kettering Station, to the excitement of our disembarked passengers and a whole gaggle of onlookers brandishing the handheld devices of the current century.
Go!
After dozens of obligatory selfies, we set off northwards again, but this time to the soundtrack, puffing and whistling, of the mighty steam locomotive hauling the train unaided by diesel power. Steam is of course an essential component for this endeavour. As we had entered Kettering Station, I had noticed the presence of fire engines, which I assumed to be a precaution against line-side fires, which might be caused by sparks from our freshly attached steam locomotive. My expert at the adjacent table corrects me. The fire brigade is of course there to bring water in sufficient quantities for the Flying Scotsman to be able to generate steam. It's nothing to do with the fire risk and just reflects the fact that the water is not plentifully available adjoining our railway lines these days. As if to emphasise how we're travelling back in time, tiny black spots start to appear on the impossibly white tablecloths of the British Pullman. My daughter asked me what these are, and we realise specks of soot from the Flying Scotsman are wafting through the open windows. Admired by onlookers throughout the entire route from Kettering, our steam-hauled train makes its majestic arrival at Derby Station to a celebrity welcome, one happily extended to its soot-covered crew as well. We make our way to the greatest gathering at Derby's Alstom factory. This is a location forever etched into my heart through my company's role in saving it during the tumultuous 2011 campaign, following the Thameslink fleet order being placed overseas by the UK government. Would that even be conceivable in 2025, as we seem as a nation, thank goodness, to have fallen back in love with making things here? The greatest gathering is a huge celebration of mostly British design, engineering and manufacturing, though of course rail is now a truly international industry and an amazing gift to the world from our small island. I endeavour to enlighten my considerately attentive daughter on the minor differences between the Class 44, 45 and 55 locomotives on display, as well as a dazzling array of earlier steam and later diesel and electric models. I explain that it's not just the sight of these machines which impresses, but also the smells and the sounds. Many of the diesel engines are turning over in order to make my point. But I think of more interest are my anecdotes on our family history of working in the railways over several eras, right up to the present. And one of my earlier memories of being lifted up by my grandfather, also a railwayman, to see steam locomotives passing through North London in their final days. I ventured that Megan might be back here in 2075, with successor generations of walkers reminiscing about today's trip. Surely no amount of hype for driverless or flying cars, autonomous flying taxis, hyperloops, or other science fiction from Silicon Valley seems likely to displace over that time the unique capacity of metal wheels and rails to move large numbers of people and huge quantities of goods safely, swiftly, and with minimal environmental impact. We return to the Belmond British Pullman for the trip back to London, but find that we are not simply retracing our outward route. Travelling via Tamworth and the outskirts of Birmingham, we see some of the vast HS2 structures stamped into the landscape, which presaged the next generation of rail travel. As we are once again presented with a succession of outstanding dishes by the British Pullman crew, the passing Oxfordshire and Berkshire countryside displays its tapestry of greens and golds, highlighted by the setting sun, making me wonder for a moment why anyone ever bothers to take a holiday abroad. But of course, it isn't drizzly or grey out there just now. We reach Victoria via Oxford, Reading, Staines and Clapham Junction, some 30 minutes late. But this is of no consequence after such a wonderful day. My thanks go to Belmond for the opportunity to experience the British Pullman, to Rail 200, Alstom and all the contributors to the greatest gathering for their magnificent exhibition, and for all the railway people whose efforts since 1825 fully justified such an extraordinary celebration.
So, Mark, you seem to have a fabulous day. What do you think of the Great Gathering itself, though?
Well, it was an absolutely marvellous day, as you will have heard and listeners will have heard from my account. And it was an immensely impressive event. And really, I think, apart from anything else, put the sort of capstone on the role of Derby as the leading city in the UK's rail industry and the rightful capital of rail when it comes to the future location that we're promised for Great British Railways. So I think the city can be proud, and the rail businesses nationally, but in particular those in and around the city of Derby and Derbyshire can be very proud of what they've achieved. I think for all of us, and we're going to come on to this in a moment to discuss, it's really how do we sort of capture that enthusiasm and celebration around rail for the last 200 years and focus it onto the future of rail and how it can contribute to the UK, hopefully for the next 200.
Yes, inevitably, I got asked that at my talk about, will railways be around in 200 years' time? When obviously we won't. But and I must say, I said yes. I said railways have had this amazing capacity to reinvent themselves. They went for a bad period really after the Second World War, when many transport planners thought, oh, railways, 19th century invention, really doesn't have a place in the 21st century. We have to close all the lines and turn them into coach routes or whatever. And that moment has clearly passed, and we now have high-speed rail. We now have uh, subway systems, underground systems in cities, kind of growing up across the world. We have freight being carried in absolutely amazing quantities on the railways. So there's no doubt that railways have got a long future, and steel wheel on rail is with us for a while. So no, it was great to actually celebrate that 200 years.
Notwithstanding that, Christian, I think it's fair to say that not everything is sweetness and light when it comes to the future of rail in Derby, Derbyshire and the wider East Midlands. And this is because, of course, as many listeners will know, the UK government decided in the recent spending review not to proceed with completing the electrification of the Midland Main Line all the way to Derby, Nottingham and Sheffield. Currently, the wires have progressed from the south as far as Wigston, just south of Leicester. But although everything was geared up and kind of in place to continue the project and complete it, which has been promised on and off by various governments over many years, the decision was taken not to proceed. To kind of add insult to injury, the government decided at the same time to spend £300 million roughly on a number of junction improvements to the A38 road, which happens to be very close to Derby. And so those that are campaigning for rail investment are particularly annoyed about this contrast. And that meant that while the greatest gathering was going on at the Alstom Works in Derby, there was actually a protest outside organised by groups such as Stop A38 Expansion, Derbyshire Climate Action and Travel Watch East Midlands, backed up by the Transport Action Network, which is a national campaign to highlight to the visitors to the greatest gathering the kind of contrast here, that a scheme that could really transform and modernise rail connectivity to Derby and the other cities on the East Midlands route has been euphemistically paused. They don't use the word cancelled, the government, they say paused, but they were still managing to find money for a nearby road scheme to proceed. So, for when it comes to the future of rail and battling for future rail investment, there are still many, many battles to be won here. Now, on the theme of the future, Christian, you've been talking to the chief executive of one of the largest trade associations in the UK's rail industry. That trade association is called the Railway Industry Association. Its chief executive is Darren Caplan, and here's your interview.
I'm with Darren Caplan, the chief executive of the Railway Industry Association, to talk to him about Labour government's first year in office and what his concerns and hopes for the railway industry are. So, Darren, I think you think that we do at least have a government that is supportive of the railways, but not all is rosy in the park.
Yeah, good to be on the podcast. That's fair to say that if you look at the summer we've had this year with announcements in June on regional and city transport, and 15-16 billion pounds for that around the country. We look at the spending review and talk about various infrastructure schemes in that. There have been some positive pronouncements, and there is obviously progress going on in the King's Speech, looking at legislation to bring rail reform and GBR forward. It feels like this government wants to associate itself with a positive rail programme. There are concerns, and we can come to those later in the interview, but overall it feels like the Rail Minister, Peter Hendy, wants to make sure that the government's associated with positive news in rail, and given the difficulty we had in the last year of the previous administration, that's got to be positive news.
Sure, but we've had some rather odd things. So we have some enhancement promised and whatever, but then we got strange things like the Midland Main Line electrification, something that's been going on for years and is partly completed, and they've decided to pause that. I mean, what's your thinking on that?
Well, it's a very good point. I mean, what's interesting is when the government published its spending review, that regional and cities plan I was telling you about, they also published an infrastructure strategy. And the key point of all these things was the government wanted to be seen to be delivering. They wanted to deliver, presumably politically, by the time of the next election. So they wanted to show progress, spades in the ground, real things happening. And then when the mainline electrification pause was announced, it seemed to be counter to the impression they were trying to give, because here's a scheme that's already in progress. You can always show progress on it. It's very well supported through the northern seats, the constituencies that Labour presumably wants to win at the next election. I appreciate that the reasons given by mode trains, the fact you may not need electrification in that part of the country, was part of Peter Hendy's thinking. But still, here's a scheme they could have shown real progress on, real delivery, and there are other schemes they're working on that may not be delivered for many years. So, for example, HS2 is a positive scheme as far as the railway industry is concerned, but that won't be delivered till well into the 2030s. So if you're looking at the next election, you want to show progress, you'd have thought Midland Main Line was one of those.
Absolutely. I mean, while we're on the subject of HS2, do you think that's absorbing a lot of money that would otherwise be spent on other aspects of the industry?
Well, these schemes are based on spending every year rather than an overall cost in 1 year. So that the kind of spending was already programmed in for HS2, and it's a scheme that brings lots of benefits and lots of capacity benefits for other parts of the network. At RIA, the Railway Industry Association, we don't really give the government a hard time on the amount of money it spends on rail. Our bigger issue is about having visibility and pipeline of the money it's going to spend. So it's up to the government to decide what it wants to spend on HS2, what it wants to spend on the rail network enhancements pipeline, what it wants to spend on rolling stock. That's up to the government. We will obviously want decent figures, but actually the amount of money coming to rail has been pretty positive, and we haven't criticised the government for the amount. It's more about having a long-term strategy for rail, visibility of the work it wants to do on infrastructure and rolling stock and signalling in other areas, and things like getting more private investment in and how the rail industry is structured. So they're the kind of things that we work on behalf of our members.
But there is a bit of lack of clarity about how exactly they're going to spend money you do have. For example, a rolling stock strategy. I presume you'd like to see that.
Well, it was something that was announced back in October. I mean, we lobbied for this for quite a long time. There was some movement last summer when it came to Alstom and its Church Lane. There are some old orders out there. But the issue with rolling stock is you tend to know quite a long time in advance when you need new trains, when they need to be refurbished, you know what's coming up. And rather than having big booms and busts as we currently have, if we can have a smooth pipeline and we know what's coming up, then that helps the OEMs and other people around the industry who are working on it. And we do desperately need an idea of what the government's thinking in terms of its strategy, in terms of rolling stock, and then also specific orders that it wants to let out. And so again, we know there's work out there, our members know there's work out there, but it needs to come in a smooth way and as soon as possible.
Have you pressed them on this and said, look, we'd really like to see this, say, by the autumn or something?
Yeah, we have pressed them, we'll continue to press them. They keep coming back and saying there will be an announcement. The thing that worries me about that is, as you know, for 5 years we've been saying to the government, give us an announcement on the rail network enhancements pipeline, yes. And we haven't had that. So we can't have a situation with rolling stock where we keep getting, we will publish it shortly in due course. We need it to be published as soon as possible. And just to bottom out on this issue, if there are problems with making an announcement, tell us that as well. You know, there's a general problem with rail at the moment of a lack of communication about what the government's thinking, and we need to hear more of its plans or when it's going to announce what it intends to do.
Right, so even getting a date for stuff, announcements would be helpful. And this presumably is a concern of your members, that they want to know what money might be available in 2 or 3 years' time and what plans they should make.
Yes, well, I mean, many of our members, they plan years ahead. They need to know what teams they need, what plant and machinery they need. If they've got a supply chain that works with them, they need to make sure they're working closely with them and building it up. And every time you have a hiatus in work, you disband teams, they go overseas, or they go to other sectors, and bringing it all back together makes it more expensive. So an example is electrification. In Germany, they have a rolling program of electrification, and the costs are much more affordable. In this country, we go for years where we don't have electrification, it comes back, we do some more.
We have Great Western, and then we have anything, and then we have...
So just having the kind of consistent work, visible certain pipelines makes a huge difference to our members. And it's, if you speak to Rail Industry Association members and ask them for the number one issue, it is often about boom and bust and a lack of a pipeline. And it was recognised, to be fair, by the last government. In the CP7 announcements, they said that the government should work closer, the supply chain should work closer with Network Rail and clients and the government to make have more certain pipelines. So we asked the current government, the new government, to similarly do more to bring to life the projects that are coming up. It makes a huge difference to our bigger members and our smaller members.
Presumably another concern is reorganisation and what GBR is going to look like. I mean, do you have any thoughts about what you'd like to see on that? I mean, maybe again, you'd just like to see some clarity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the slight concern I had with the Railways Bill consultation a few months ago was there's still such big issues that haven't been determined yet.
Such as what?
Well, they're still consulting on the level of devolved and national decision making, the balance of track and train, who are the winners and losers, the directing mind. There's lots of things that need more clarity, and it may be the case that people in the know lots of things that are happening in it. But a lot of suppliers say to me that they feel that there's a bit of a sense of drift. There's a sense of not knowing what's coming up, and we need more information. And another example is there's no one leading GBR at the moment. So although it comes into being in the autumn, until we know who's going to run it and how it's set up, there's always going to be a feeling of, when's this going to go forward? What are the key dates? When are we going to know how the structure works? What's happening in Derby? There's so many issues up in the air, and our members just want more information. So I come back to this communication issue again. If the government knows when it's going to have more things to say, then tell us when it's going to make its announcements.
Or at least tell us, yes, when you're going to, even if you're not going to announce it, just tell us when. And why do you think this is? Why do you think they're so opaque about this? I mean, presumably you've pressed them on this.
Well, I suspect there's lots of internal stakeholders that need to be squared off. So
that's a very delicate way of putting it, Darren.
There's lots of players involved. They need to get their ducks in a row, and I understand all that. But you've got to remember, this is a process that started in May 2018.
With the timetable change announced by one Chris Grayling. Yes.
We've had a lot, it's now, what, 8 years in?
Yes, 7, 8 years transport in. Secretaries, yes.
Prime ministers, technical secretaries, ministers, and we do need to move on with this at a decent pace. As I said, I think there's good intentions. I don't think that there's anything going on that you wouldn't support in terms of trying to develop a good policy. But at the moment, it does feel like there's a bit of drift. We do need more communication. We need to know who's going to lead it, and we need to resolve some of these big questions so that everyone can plan ahead and do the work they need to do.
So you've recently put out a document about Labour government's first year in office, and you have some positive things. You had some 25 asks, I understand.
Yeah, that's right. So we put out a 12-month analysis of the first year of Labour government. We looked at 3 areas. Has a key ask been fulfilled? Have something taken place that's going forward but hasn't yet been delivered but it's in progress? Or is there an area where progress is unclear or nothing's happened at all? A certain one is the King's Speech. So we know that rail reform is going ahead, and it's been and is likely to go ahead in the autumn. Legislation has been lodged. We think there are 16 areas where we have had some progress, and another 8 areas where we've seen nothing at all, but we expect there will be. I have spoken with some people in government, and I think it's a fair assessment in the sense of there's more we don't know about, but because they haven't announced it publicly, we can't really give an evaluation of it. But there is a broad sense of going forward, but we do need to see more. And the kind of 4 broad areas, if I may quickly say what they are from our point of view. We need that long-term rail strategy to know what the government's thinking. We need to see more visible and smooth pipelines of work, both in terms of a rolling stock pipeline and in terms of infrastructure and associated areas. We need to see more about harnessing private investment. If the government doesn't want to spend in some areas, then private money can come in and help with some of that. We need to see more in terms of partnership working, in terms of how the centre and the devolved parts of the country work together, and the mayoral combined authorities and all the actors in that. And then, as I've just discussed with you on things like rail reform and GBR, how will track and train fit close together? Will the DOT take more of a back roll day to day and let the experts in the industry take it forward? These are things that are still to be decided. So these are things we'll be analysing over the next 12 months, and we'll do another report card then.
Okay. As a last thing then, you mentioned the private sector there. Do you really think there is a role for the private sector investing in this, or is it one of those pie in the sky things where they always say, we're getting the private sector to invest, but ultimately the bill largely comes down to government?
Well, lots of our members are willing to take the risk and get involved. We did
that's the key point. Are they willing to take risks?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done a future of rail stations report, which the government actually and the Prime Minister backed in a recent select committee, which says there's much more you can do if you work with private investment in stations. You make the most out of those assets and facilities. So there are things that our members want to get involved in. I would say the proof's in the pudding. Give us a chance and see what happens. At the moment, a lot of it is you hear the Treasury saying, well, we can borrow money, we can invest it more cost effectively. But then if you're not going to invest it, if you're not going to spend money on a scheme or like Euston or something like that for HS2, then give the private sector a chance to get involved.
I can't resist the last question about HS2. I mean, since you mentioned it, what would you like to see happen on that? I mean, presumably you would want to see it go through to Euston, and you would want to see it go through to Crewe. And do you think that's going to happen?
I think it will happen. I mean, we characterised it when the government announced last government announced plans in October 23 as an Acton to Aston line, and
that was me. That was my expression.
Well, yes. We used it as well, mate. So we're on the
Acton to Aston shuttle.
The Acton to Aston shuttle.
That was my expression. Yes.
So we very much want to see it. We wanted to see the full scheme. Our belief was that to get the full benefits of the scheme, you have to have the full why. But actually, we are where we are. And I think it is important that you go through to Euston, so over Euston to Birmingham line. In fact, you try and get it a bit further north as well, so that you don't have a bottleneck in Handsacre north of Birmingham. Yeah. Having Mark Wilde come in is a positive step. He did a very good job with Crossrail and finished that off, and now we have a fantastic piece of infrastructure that millions and millions of people are using. So if Mark Wilde can come in, given the freedom to make this project work, I think it'll be a major asset, and we'll look back on it in years to come as not only a fast line between London and the north, but also one that releases lots of capacity for other parts of the network. So, and we're going to need it. I mean, just to finish off, it's clear that more and more people are travelling by rail. The passenger numbers
very crowded. I've been on the rails a lot lately. They're very crowded.
The passenger numbers are back. They're pretty much pre-COVID levels. And a steer report that we commissioned last year showed they're going to grow between 37% and 97% and 97% to 2025 to 2050 over the next 25 years. We're going to need more capacity. So anything we can do to create that, we're going to support, and hopefully the government will too.
Okay, I'm going to end with putting you on the spot here. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is totally pessimistic and 10 is totally optimistic, what's the number?
Okay, I put myself at 7.5, 8. I am positive about the future,
right?
And I think the rail industry can play a big part in that, not just in the UK but also around the world. Rail is growing all around the world between 3% and 6%, and the UK needs to be part of that big export story as well. So for railway suppliers, I have a positive view of the future, but decisions and announcements need to take place now to give us the best chance of taking full advantage of that.
Darren Caplan from the Railway Industry Association, thank you very much for that excellent interview. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, I read an interesting piece of research the other day about Norway. Now, Norway has something like 90% of its car sales are electric, and it has encouraged that with all sorts of subsidies and toll-free runs and so on. And of course, electricity is relatively cheap in a country that has enormous power coming from hydro and the like. And the result of this has unfortunately been not that people have been driving less, but that they've been driving more. And in fact, it even seems that maybe the modal share of cars has gone up slightly as against walking and cycling, because transport by car has become so cheap in relation to other forms of transport. So there is an important message for our government here that they have to be careful about what subsidies they offer people with electric cars. And we know at the moment that you don't pay the congestion charge in London, for example, with the electric car and so on. And obviously you don't pay that ultra low emission zone either. So they're good. And of course you don't pay a vehicle excise tax. So all these things are going to add up to an enormous subsidy, and the government's going to have to think about how they, in a way, discourage electric cars from becoming the mode of choice. Very interesting problem.
Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Walmart, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media channels, including Blue Sky, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle on X is @AllStationsPod.